Victorian criticism refers to literary criticism produced during the Victorian era, which spanned from 1837 to 1901 during Queen Victoria's reign in Britain. This period was marked by significant social, political, and cultural changes, and these transformations influenced the critical perspectives of the time. Here's a brief overview of Victorian criticism. Historical context. Industrial Revolution. The Victorian era witnessed rapid industrialization, leading to significant social and economic changes. This period saw the rise of new social classes, urbanization, and shifts in the traditional class structure. Scientific advancements. The era was characterized by significant scientific progress, including Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, which had a profound impact on literature and criticism. Social reform. There were ongoing debates about social issues, including labor rights, education, and gender roles. These debates often influenced literary criticism and the interpretation of texts. Major themes and characteristics. Moral and ethical concerns. Victorian critics often emphasized moral and ethical values in literature. They were concerned with the moral purpose of literature and its ability to guide and uplift society. Realism and representation. The era saw a focus on realism, with critics often examining how accurately literature represented the social and political realities of the time. This was reflected in the works of authors like Charles Dickens and George Eliot. Historical context. Victorian critics placed a strong emphasis on understanding literature within its historical and social context. They often analyzed how contemporary events and social issues were reflected in literary works. Literary tradition. There was a strong focus on literary tradition and classical influences. Critics often compared contemporary works with classical and earlier literature to assess their quality and significance. Gender and class. Victorian criticism frequently addressed issues of gender and class, reflecting the era's preoccupations with social hierarchies and gender roles. Prominent critics. Matthew Arnold (1822–1888), a prominent Victorian critic, Arnold emphasized the importance of cultural and moral values in literature. His critical work included essays on literature and culture, and he is known for his concept of high seriousness in literature. John Ruskin (1819–1900), an influential critic and art theorist, Ruskin focused on the aesthetic and moral qualities of art and literature. He was known for his writings on art, architecture, and social issues. George Eliot. Mary Ann Evans (1819–1880), although better known as a novelist, Eliot also contributed to literary criticism through her essays and reviews. Her critical work often reflected her concern with social and moral issues. Influence on later criticism. Victorian criticism laid the groundwork for many modern critical approaches. The emphasis on moral and social issues, the focus on realism, and the exploration of historical context influenced later developments in literary theory and criticism. The Victorian period's concern with social and ethical issues can be seen as a precursor to more contemporary discussions on these topics in literary studies. Understanding Victorian criticism provides insight into how literature was interpreted in a time of great social and cultural change and how these interpretations continue to influence literary analysis today. Here are some of the main arguments in Victorian criticism, explained with simple examples. 1. Moral and ethical concerns. Argument. Victorian critics often focused on the moral and ethical implications of literature. They believed that literature should promote moral values and offer lessons for improving society. Example. In Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, Victorian critics praised the novel for its portrayal of social injustice and the moral redemption of its characters. The novel's depiction of the harsh conditions faced by the poor was seen as a call for social reform and moral improvement. 2. Realism and representation. Argument. Critics valued realism in literature, emphasizing the accurate representation of contemporary social issues and everyday life. Example. George Eliot's Middlemarch is a novel that was appreciated by Victorian critics for its realistic portrayal of 19th-century provincial life and social dynamics. The novel's detailed depiction of characters and social issues was seen as a reflection of the real world, making it a significant work of social realism. 3. Historical context. Argument. Victorian critics often examined literature in relation to its historical and social context, believing that understanding the background of a text was crucial for its interpretation. Example. In analyzing Jane Eyre, by Charlotte Brontë, critics explored how the novel reflected the issues of class and gender during the Victorian era. They discussed how Bronte's portrayal of the struggles of a governess highlighted the social class distinctions and gender inequalities of the time. 4. Literary tradition. Argument. There was a strong emphasis on literary tradition, with critics often comparing contemporary works with classical and earlier literature to evaluate their quality. Example. When evaluating Alfred Lord Tennyson's poetry, critics compared his work to that of earlier poets like Shakespeare and Milton. Tennyson's adherence to classical forms and his use of traditional poetic techniques were seen as both a tribute to and a continuation of literary tradition. 5. Gender and class. Argument. Victorian critics were concerned with how literature depicted gender roles and social class. They often analyzed how these elements influenced characters and narratives. Example. In Wuthering Heights, by Emily Bronte, critics explored how the novel challenged traditional gender roles and class structures. The character of Catherine Earnshaw defies conventional expectations for women of her time, and the novel's depiction of social class conflicts was seen as a critique of Victorian class hierarchies. These arguments illustrate how Victorian criticism was deeply engaged with the moral, social, and historical aspects of literature, reflecting the concerns and values of the era. One important concept in Victorian criticism is moral didacticism. This concept encapsulates the idea that literature should not only entertain but also instruct and improve the moral character of its readers. Victorian critics often believed that literature had a social responsibility to promote ethical behavior and reflect moral values. Key aspects of moral didacticism. Moral purpose. Victorian critics saw literature as a means to convey moral lessons and promote virtuous behavior. They valued works that offered clear moral guidance and addressed issues of social justice and personal integrity. Social critique. Many Victorian novels include elements of social critique, aiming to highlight social injustices and encourage reform. This often involved portraying the struggles of marginalized or disadvantaged characters to elicit sympathy and inspire action. Character development. Characters in Victorian literature were frequently depicted in ways that illustrated moral lessons. Their development often involved overcoming personal flaws or societal obstacles to achieve moral redemption. Example in literature. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol is a classic example of moral didacticism. The novella tells the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, a miserly man who was visited by three spirits on Christmas Eve. Through these visits, Scrooge witnesses the consequences of his selfishness and learns about the importance of compassion and generosity. The moral of the story emphasizes the value of kindness and the possibility of personal transformation, reflecting Victorian concerns with moral and social improvement. Importance. Moral didacticism reflects the Victorian era's belief in the power of literature to influence society and individual behavior. This concept underscores how literature was used not just for artistic expression but also as a tool for ethical instruction and social critique.